Hello everybody, I'm back with another video for you today. I am still live and I'm still playing Gwent, although I haven't of course been streaming, and the videos, not really been a thing, so sorry about that. But I wanted to weigh in on a discussion that's been going on recently about the change on Pro Ladder to player identities being hidden. You can no longer actually see what your opponent is called. You still see their trinkets and sort of border, avatar, that sort of thing, but you don't actually see their name anymore. And this has caused a lot of controversy and a lot of people saying that it's a bad thing, and I actually wanted to give an alternative opinion to that, which I'm sure many of the top players will disagree with, but yeah, and I hope it can make some sort of discussion about the balance and design of Gwent and some of the cards more generally as well. But yeah, first things first, so why was this change implemented? Well, I guess the main reason would be to kind of limit or decrease the amount of win trading and sniping happening. Obviously, especially if you've been watching stuff on this channel, you know there's been a fair amount of sort of win trading controversy, and sniping has been a problem as well. When you watch a streamer who's playing the game and try to win by looking at their cards, that's also been a common problem throughout the history of Gwent. And it's a problem for a lot of card games, that deal with sort of turn-based, and, being able to see the opponent's cards is a pretty big advantage, it turns out. So a lot of people have been saying that it doesn't really help these problems, and that is true to some extent, but definitely there are some situations where it's now less likely that you get sniped or that you win trade. So these situations where you maybe queue into a streamer, you aren't watching them at the time, but maybe you recognize the name and you go, oh, that's a streamer, I can maybe get an easy win if I go and watch their stream. And I'm sure people were doing that before this name change. Obviously you can still watch a streamer and then queue into them intentionally, but definitely the amount of sniping will go down from this change, because fewer people who would have gone into the stream had they queued into a streamer won't be able to do that anymore, right? And similarly with win trading, although it's not so much of an issue now, because the qualification for tournaments is based only on an online qualifier rather than actually just straight through ladder qualifying. But it still will maybe become a problem for World Masters qualification, which relies on crown points and ladder placement. So if there's some kind of close race for the place to World Masters, then you could see win trading being an issue again, but yeah, either way, with win trading, it's gonna decrease the amount that happens, probably, maybe not by a huge amount if it already doesn't go on very much, which is likely it doesn't, but if you have a friend who's trying to qualify, say for this World Masters in, half a year or a year from now or whenever it will be, and you see that they're very close to achieving that goal, maybe you're not super close friends with them, not close enough that you would plan to win trade together, or maybe you don't want to involve them in the win trading and dirty their name or whatever, so you can then maybe forfeit to them. No skin off your back, you're not trying to qualify for anything, but they are, so you're just helping them out, and since you recognize their name, you're able to do that. Now, the new system prevents that. You can't just queue into a friend and say, oh, that's a friend of mine, and then forfeit because you don't know who it is until you've finished the game. So yes, it won't stop organized and well thought out win trading from happening, but it will definitely stop sort of some cases which I think have already even happened in the past, and there's potentially some evidence of that happening, where two people that know each other end up win trading, and it's because one player happens to queue into that person, and one of them is trying to qualify and the other one isn't, if that makes sense. So yeah, the function of this change actually does help. It maybe doesn't help as much as people would like, it doesn't completely solve either issue, but it definitely does something, and I think that's kind of a net positive on that front. So the main reason that people are getting upset about the change is to do with the idea of surprise value and decks and cards which rely on the opponent not knowing what they're playing in order to actually win. They're playing cards that can gain a huge kind of range of points depending on how well they're played around. You're thinking things like potentially Igni and Dragon's Dream, and maybe even scenarios with artifact removal being the way to counter that. But yeah, the other issue that I have with this argument is that it's kind of blaming the change, which I think is a good one, and actually the way that it should be by default, having hidden identities on Pro Ladder, it's blaming that change for other problems that exist with Gwent and the design of cards and things like that. If you have an issue with the feeling of playing against Nenneke Igni, or the balance of playing against Nenneke Igni when it is unknown to you, then that's an issue you have with the balance or design of the game, rather than the question of having your identity shown or not. I think those are separate issues, and yes, one issue does exacerbate the other, but I'll get on to why I don't think that's a reason to call for reverting this change. And that has to do with my belief that this should be the default way that Pro Ladder works and competitive Gwent play works, and I'll kind of explain my thought on that. This goes as follows. I think the default should be that you don't know who your opponent is, or at the very least you don't have any idea of what their deck is, and those things kind of go together, because if you played against an opponent you have an idea of their play style and things like that, and that's information that I don't think you should have access to. We're not playing in a tournament, this isn't open deck lists. I think that players should have to kind of come up on the fly and think about what the opponent could have and what they should play around, and having prior information that you've gained through playing games already against this opponent. I don't think that's an advantage that is very expressive of skill either, if we're comparing it to the idea that surprise value isn't very skill expressive either. Already on Pro Ladder, the previous seasons, it was very, very common, and I know many Pro Ladder players who were recording the opponents they played against, recording their cards, some of the important cards in the deck, maybe even a lot of them, maybe only a couple. If they saw some very strange inclusions or non-meta cards, they would write those down somewhere or just make note of them. It's very common practice previously on Pro Ladder to do that, because you gain an advantage if you're able to have previously played against something and now know what they're playing when you run into it another time. It's kind of obvious, right? And I think that was creating unnecessary tedium and requiring more time commitment than was reasonable, I guess, for the Pro Ladder grind. I guess some players will disagree with that and they'll say, yeah, but it's added dedication and determination to the grind, and why not gain this advantage if you're willing to put in the effort? I can't really disagree with that argument if that's what you think. Personally, I just think the game should be played within the game and not have any kind of external or extraneous games going on which require more time commitment and sort of metagaming the game itself, because I think it's a bit tedious personally. From my position, I would actually like this to be the sort of natural state of things, where players don't have any extra information, they just have what they've got in the game, they see some cards being played, and then they make decisions based off of all that. And now if we go from that sort of premise, so this is kind of the natural state that things should be in, it would kind of not make any sense to revert this change and go back to having names shown, right? Because then you're just introducing the problem that people are going to write down cards and get all these extraneous advantages that they shouldn't really have in my ideal competitive system, which is just based on the format that the ladder is based on, rather than metagaming it and all this stuff. So another issue that comes with having names shown is that it stifles both, pure surprise value decks which aren't telegraphed at all, things like maybe Nenneke Igni in Northern Realms, but it also actually stifles decks that are a little bit surprising, but not relying on surprise factor. Now, that's a little bit of a weird thing to say, so let me just explain what I mean. So you can have cards that are telegraphed and you can expect them in some way, or they're maybe not super telegraphed, but the surprise value that they gain doesn't necessarily swing a whole game in the way that Igni or Nenneke does. So let me give you an example. Maybe a Hjalmar for Skellige. That's a card that's not really meta at all. It's quite a surprising card. It could gain some, surprise value if you play against it, right? And they have a 12-point card in the graveyard, and this guy maybe doesn't have removal for my, for my engine or whatever. You play it, and then, they have a Hjalmar. Oh god, surprise value. I lost the game because I played into a Hjalmar. I didn't know he had that. I would argue that's not the kind of surprise value that's similar to Igni Nenneke, where it's something that you can't see coming in any way, and it just is game deciding all on its own potentially. It's very, very swingy. So something more like Hjalmar, or there are like so many cards like this that just aren't very meta, and they can gain a higher range of points when they're unexpected, but that range is, a little bit more sort of smaller, if you like, than some of the bigger, swingier cards. Now it's still surprise value in a way, but I don't think that's a bad thing for the game. In fact, I think that's quite healthy when those kind of cards and those kind of decks and deck building ideas are incentivized, because it leads to higher diversity in decks and less kind of stagnant meta. If everyone's aware of the exact cards that the opponent's running because they're just going to write it down after they play against them, then that means that the decks that are objectively the best when all the cards are known by each player, those decks will always just rise to the top and be the most played decks. And I think this is a problem ProLad has had for the longest time, where it doesn't really make sense to innovate and do stuff, because your opponent's just going to write down what you have anyway and then see it coming, and then their deck that's just been optimized to the max is going to be smashing you, or maybe not smashing you but beating you by a small amount the next time you play. Because these meta decks, they're very, very strong when you know all the cards. That's kind of why they're at the top of the top, because everyone's playing them, but they're still very good. But I think there's this subset of decks which can be very strong and deserve to be strong, but as maybe slightly weaker than the top tier decks, unless that surprise factor is kind of being enabled, and then maybe they're at a similar level, and then you've got more diversity in the decks being played. Now, I'm not talking just stuff like Igni and Scorch. I'm talking just playing something a bit different that the opponent doesn't quite know. Maybe you have a Hjalmar or some like veterans, and some of these cards are a bit unknown, and the opponent's like, what am I supposed to play around here? I don't think there's a huge problem with these kind of decks existing, and if they're good enough and consistent enough and reliable enough, then more people play them and they become sort of more meta, and then as I said, you get a more stable and diverse meta than, maybe not stable, but you get a more diverse meta than when you just have a bunch of top tier decks that can beat anything, and you can note down cards and see any differences, and then beat them with the high tier decks. So I've given quite a few arguments there. Let's just recap them, I guess. So the first thing is that while it's frustrating to deal with sort of these nasty cards and combos of cards that you don't see coming, potentially, it doesn't actually harm the results of the competitive play, i.e. it's affecting everyone equally, so it's not damaging competitive play. It's maybe damaging the enjoyment that competitive players get from the game, which is an issue, and I agree that it is an issue. But the second point is that being an issue isn't actually an issue with the player names being hidden. It's more so an issue with the game's design and how cards are balanced and things like that. So if you have problems with those things, I would take them up with the cards themselves and say, get rid of Igni Naneke, this is nonsense, or get rid of leaders playing being able to play multiple cards in a turn, get rid of that, or get rid of artifacts and artifact removal. And it's, maybe going to highlight a lot of the problems that Gwent has, because it has got quite a lot of problems in terms of the design direction of the game. In fact, that's a whole nother topic, but I'm not even sure Gwent has really had a design direction for the majority of its lifespan, and I'm not sure. That's another topic altogether, but if you see what I'm saying on that one, take issue with the way things are designed rather than this change, which is actually helping competitive play. And that goes to my next point, which is about how before people were gaining unfair advantages by using these extraneous methods, even scouting opponents, it becomes a thing, or like watching streams in order to gain information on what other people are playing before you even queue into them. So sometimes you can have information on people's decks before you even play against them, and I just think that's some really unfair extraneous variables that are benefiting some players over others, which is not the case for this situation. So I think that pretty much sums up why I think this change is actually a good one, and why I think everyone getting a little bit upset about it is not necessarily got all the points now. But there definitely is a problem with the implementation of this, so that being that avatars and borders of players are still visible, so you can still see if your opponent's running, I don't know, Geralt with a wild boar border or whatever, and you can still see their XP level and prestige level over here. which, needless to say, isn't very helpful if you're trying to hide the identities of players. It still gives a little bit of an option for people to maybe track, ooh, is this player running this, and like, that guy had a border from last time. It enables like a meta game within the game again of trying to guess people's identities and maybe looking at their prestige level and ooh, how much XP does this guy have compared to this guy? Is this the guy running Igni from last game? And I think that should just be completely nullified. You shouldn't have like some kind of middle ground where, okay, there's a little bit of identity, but you have to kind of guess at the identity a little bit. I think that's just a bit silly, tedious. It incentivizes changing your trinkets all the time, which is just dumb. Like, I don't know why that's a thing. So I think that stuff should all be hidden as well if they're going this route. It's kind of a no-brainer to me. Maybe show it after the game or whatever, if you're worried about the cosmetics being less valuable. But I mean, this is at the high competitive level, so it shouldn't really even be a concern that the cosmetics aren't visible at the start of the game. But I'm rambling a little bit now, but you get my point. So that's the real issue, I think, here, is the implementation of it is not very consistent and not very well thought through. They definitely should have made everything hidden if they were going for that approach, and I hope that's something they actually work towards. I really hope they don't turn back this change, because I think it's healthy for the pro ladder. I think it increases the diversity of decks, as we've talked about, and it also encourages a little bit more actually competitively valid play rather than scouting opponents and writing cards down, which I think is something that shouldn't really be a thing on the pro ladder. And yeah, I think that basically sums up everything I had to say about this. There are some valid points being thrown around, and yes, there are definitely cards and interactions in the game that are very frustrating to deal with, and I agree, like, there are some things that you can't see coming and you have to guess and play around. I mean, I've even talked about recently scenarios and why I think they're very dumb, and they're probably even dumber than they were before now, because of them being less prevalent means that they're more binary in how they function with artifact removal and whatnot. But definitely problems with the game itself, but I would say that this is a positive change for Pro Ladder as a whole. So yeah, if we want to maybe move the discussion towards how the game itself and the cards and the interactions can be improved, I think that would be a good step. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.